This is my 2021 Triumph Tiger 900 GT Pro. I've done about 10,000 miles on the bike since I got it last April, so it's been almost a year. And as you can see on the rear tire there, it's pretty flattened off. I'm planning on another really long trip, so now is a good time to replace those tires. I ordered them from RevZilla back in December, and now is the time to put them on. So the first thing I did was lift up the front of the bike. I have the bike on the center stand here. It's smart to go ahead and break the front tire axle free. I did not in this case, but you need to loosen those two pinch bolts in the front. This is pretty easy. It's easier if you do it while it's still on the ground. Then you loosen the axle. I have one of those multi-tools that I got off of, I'm pretty sure it was RevZilla. You need to take the brake calipers off. And as long as I'm going to have the wheels off, one of the things I always like to do is go ahead and clean the brakes, as long as you have everything taken apart. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the calipers off. I like to put the bolts back where they came out from. That way I don't lose them or kick them around in the garage or whatever. These come off pretty easy. Actually, I like the front brake design here on the Tiger for this year. I had a 2014 Tiger 800 before, and the front brake design was very different. I like this one. There's a wheel speed sensor there. Be careful, there is a washer behind it that helps space it off, and you can see it just fell. There's a little washer there that helps space it to keep it from actually hitting the wheel sensor. You want to make sure you put that back under there. And then I take one of my straps and basically hold up the brake calipers on my crash bars. Now pull the front axle out, and the front wheel should just pretty much roll right out. There's a spacer on each side. I usually like to take the spacers and put them back on the axle and slide the axle back into place, because I was going to be taking this to cycle gear, so I knew it was going to be several days. It just reduces the chance that I'm going to go kicking these spacers around or forget where I put them. So if you take the spacers and put them back in the order you got them off, it's just much easier for later. And there's the wheel off. And there's the new tires that I had it sitting on. Now you need to remove the rear. I have a big bar here to help. Makes it a lot easier. Another thing you need to do is back off those jam nuts that hold the spacer. Back those off so that you can actually move the wheel forward, because you need to get it to slide forward about an inch so that you can actually get the chain off of the rear sprocket. Takes a little bit of patience. It's not super hard. And then I just push up from the rear of the tire until I can get it off like that. And then I pull it over to the side and then try to pull that axle out. Usually I take a little hammer, tap it from the side so I can get it moving. Just like that. See how I'm laying them out? The washer goes on the outside, and then that block. Then I'll pull the rear tire out. The rear brake caliper on the 900 does not detach. It's actually on a mount. That actually does slide out once you get the tire out, but you don't need to remove the brake caliper. It's mounted onto a side stanchion, I think it's called. Then I put the rear axle back in just to remember again what order everything went in. Just kind of thumb it on there. Now that's the rear wheel. You can see it's kind of flattened off there. One thing you always want to do is make sure you pull the sprocket out Oh, and I forgot a spacer when I did it. So you want to make sure you pull the sprocket out and make sure you get that crush drive. You don't want to send that to cycle gear when you're taking the tires out. Cycle Gear has a pretty good deal where if you buy the tires from them or from RevZilla, they'll mount them for 25 bucks, I think it is. And here we are. We're off to Cycle Gear. Here the bike is. Center stand plus that front is all you really need to hold the bike up. And I left it like this for almost a week, even while I was cleaning the brakes and other things. Now I dropped the tires off at Cycle Gear. They told me they'd get back to me in a couple days, and they did. Now here I'm trying to take the brake pads out. I'd never seen this particular design before. I take my little pry bar there, put it in between to push the brake pads back to make sure the calipers are all the way seated. There's a spring on the rear there that holds them. But you can actually just slide them to the left and right. There's two little notches in there. See how that slid? Then it pops and they come right out. That's what actually holds the brakes in place. There's no separate pins, nothing like that. The caliper itself is actually what holds them in place. It's a nice design. I think it's an upgrade from the Tiger 800. I like it a lot. You want to make sure that the brake pads themselves are still good. These obviously, one thing you can do, I have a caliper, clamp it down on the metal part, reset it to 0, and then clamp it on the brake pad itself, and you can see that's 2.5 millimeters. I think 1.25 is the minimum, so 2.5. I measure across a bunch of different pads on the brake pad itself, just to make sure that it's not wearing unevenly. These pads actually still look really, really good. So all I did was clean them up, put a little copper slip on the back of them, and put them back on the bike. You can see those little wear marks. Not all pads have that, but the OEM ones do. So when those are gone, you definitely need to change it. But in this case, it still has around a millimeter of wear. This is for the other one. There's two on the front. I put my pry bar in there. Just kind of turn it left and right to push back the calipers. Make sure that they get seated all the way back. If you've added any brake fluid, which you should not, but if you have added any brake fluid when you do this, it may cause your brake fluid to overflow. So keep an eye on that. And I found putting my fingers behind on the top part and using my thumbs on the bottom part to slide them left and right actually made it a little bit easier to get it to pop out of there. But it literally just pops out. Now this is a tool you put inside the brake caliper, spread it apart. It grabs the piston itself and you can now rotate the piston. So I will squeeze and basically rotate it around. This is to make sure none of the calipers have seized up. If one of them is super hard, you'll know it. The rubber inside has basically become either stiff or corrupted with dust or salt water or whatever. This is just something I do every time I take apart my brakes and clean them, just to make sure all the pistons are clean. And then I'm going to go spray a bunch of brake clean in there, clean it out with a toothbrush. I'll pump it out halfway. This is the new wheel. Now that it's back, you can see. These are Metzlers also. The OEM ones are Metzlers, but these are Roadtecs. I was pretty happy with the OEM tires, so I decided to go with Metzler again. This is just me using brake clean to clean the pads, taking a toothbrush to it, make sure I get all the grime off of there. Bring back down one of the calipers. Put it back in place. Put the pads in. Should actually do that in the opposite order. Put the pads in first before you put the caliper on. This is the other side. Those lips on there, I think that might be what's causing the hum some people are talking about with their brakes. If you put a little copper slip there, you probably won't hear that. So that's the caliper for the other side, for the right-hand side of the bike. Again, this speed sensor needs the little shim under it. And after you put it in place, see the shim is under it. That is shimmed to ensure that the speed sensor stays off of the speed indicator itself, which is mounted onto the main part of the hub itself. And so you want to make sure you spin that, make sure it's not touching. You can actually see it from looking from the front. Make sure that it is nowhere near the speed sensor itself. The rear tire is a little harder to get in there because that right-hand side brake, I found having the brake pads out is actually easier. If you have the brake pads in there, I literally could not get it to go. There has to be an easier way to do it. But it basically, you have to hold it up on the right-hand side because it's in a little lip while you push the wheel on the back, and you need to keep those two spacers in place. So having a second set of hands might have been helpful, but it was just me doing it, so I had to kind of push forward with my knee. Once I get everything in place, then I come back around and I torque everything. You can totally torque this while the bike is down on the ground. There's no reason to do it while it's still jacked. I just like to do that. Make sure you torque the pinch bolts as well. I'll try to put all the torque specs in the notes for the video. Pinch bolts themselves actually don't have a lot. Then you do the brake calipers. Now comes the fun part, the rear tire, and you have to adjust the chain. So I like to take a hammer and hit the back of the tire to force it to go as far forward as it can. Then check my slack on the chain. Then do little tiny adjustments, basically one turn at a time. You try to get the left side is the one that you're primarily focused on because that's the one that's going to control the tightness of the chain. And then measure from the rear and get the right side to match it so that the tire is running true. This can take a lot of trial and error where you're getting it tight and then you make one more turn and now it's too tight. Also, because the bike is still up off the ground, you actually need to leave a little bit extra because once you put it down on the ground, so if it, I believe it's 25 to 35, I'll write it in the comments below. 25 to 35, I'll do it at the 35, do it at the high end so that when I get done and I put the bike down, then I'll measure it again, and usually then it's still within spec. It's usually closer to 25 though. And here it is with the new shoes on. All told, this was probably 3 hours of time, so not too bad. Have a good day.